Hey guys, so in this one we're going to take a look at a project I started last night. It's not quite finished, but some of the steps that went into this we'll be going over, so that maybe you can get started with something like this as well. It's really not that hard, but it does require a little bit of sub-D practice and knowledge on how to create sub-D models anyways. And so it's a lot of fun. So let's just go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to load up the first save I have. That's not exactly yeah, the starting point. The starting point is actually going to be the sculpt. All right. So minus the eyes. There you go. So the sculpt here, right? This is just a simple sculpt. There's nothing special about this at all. It's anybody could do this, right? It's just using either dynamic topology or using the remesher. Go to town on the cube, start stretching and pulling it out into the shapes you need. It's really simple. Start cutting into it with clay strips or all sharp or whatever, and then use the crease or the scraper tool, flatten things out, whatever the case, right? So you can sculpt this kind of stuff out, and you use this as your base, and you retopo on top of it. This should take you little to no time at all once you get used to sculpting a little bit. Like it's not pretty, right? It's just good enough. And so it should take you, depends on your skill set or like how long you've been sculpting or whatever. But it's like an hour's worth of time, probably, roughly around there. All right, and after that, you approach it like doing a vehicle. And so when I unhide everything else, we'll hide the sculpt now. You start doing retopo of just little strips, right? Of little sub D strips. Just see how it's all going to line up. Retopo every little individual section and try to line up your vertices. That's all you're trying to do here. Just line them up the best you can. The hard part is when you start combining this together. It's just like vehicle modeling, like I said. When you start trying to line this all up, a lot of it's real easy. You just, you're basically, you turn the sub D off for a sec or whatever. You go in and you just merge at center, right? It's not really that hard, but occasionally you'll find places where you've missed something or you ran the topo wrong. You need to you need to take some time and practice doing sub D where you're learning about like redirects, like if you need to redirect a topology or your flow, your edge flow, something like that, right? That's like a quarter of an inset. So you want to pay attention to things like that. You might also need to learn to combine into certain little areas, like sometimes you might need to do some cuts. It's just little things you might want to do all over the place, right? And that's the hard part for the most part, is being able to control your sub D mesh. Like if I wanted this to run down between two triangles, like we could technically maybe get away with that if this was subdivided in the middle, right? That's technically a quad now. So that might be something that you could do. I'm not saying it's a good topo, but I'm just saying little things like that could come into play. And so you can start joining just basically all your pieces together. It's going to take you a little bit of time. The retopo might even take longer, but see, you can just kind of start doing things. Maybe you have too many edges, right? You're going to have to figure out how to work those out. This was probably the most complicated area that I had to work on. And so you can see like some of it lines up well, some of it doesn't. And so I have to cut some things back, try to figure out what you're going to do next with those individual sections and just see what's going to happen or occur. This particular case, like you can see, doesn't quite line up in that area the way we thought it was going to, perhaps, right? Even if we merged it like so. So I might want to do like just back it off and do another strip down, something like that. I think I did that actually. So you have to learn to work these a little bit. But once you get the hang of sub D modeling, it's really not that bad, right? I've done a number of videos on just creating things with sub D, so you see how it starts to work out though. Right here, see this has like an extra edge. Not sure where I'm going to put this thing, right? And so let's see what we can do. I think this one I actually ran another loop up, but that kind of kills the curvature here. So there's an add-on called Set Flow. You can enable it. It's a free download. You got to go find it and download it. But a lot of times you can grab like little sections like this. It doesn't always work perfect, but you can just set flow on them, kind of recurve them out. And so little things like that go a long way as well. Just little add-ons here or there. So set flow, loop tools as well. If you want to do like a big cylinder piece somewhere. Tools real quick. Circle it. Fill it in a bit. Do that number, right? So pretty typical stuff, right? It's not too hard, right? So then you'll be able to combine it all together rather easily. It's not too bad. And you just keep working it basically. And then after doing that, you'll end up with basically the base mesh where, oh, that's the wrong scene. This one. All right. That maybe you'll end up with a base mesh that ends up, see if I can hide everything real quick. Turn on just that base mesh. So there's the original sculpt. The antlers were just quickly use quad remesher to redo them real quick. They're not a big deal. But they were sculpted as well. Use snake hook and cylinders and stuff like that, right? But is that a quad remesh? What? Oh, that's the sculpt. Oh. I was like, what was this one? Where is the base? That is the question. Pretty sure I tagged it as I gave it a name and it's somewhere in here. Let's unhide everything real quick. I just selected Shift H. There we go. That's easier. So the Shift H hides everything else, right? And so you'll get to this point where it's like this, right? You've worked out most of your topo issues. There might be some triangles, maybe might be some n-gons that get left over. If you ever want to check for those kinds of things, you can just go to select, and you can select faces by sides. You can see number of vertices 4 is equal to. We could do greater than 5. That's going to select every n-gon. You can see right now I don't have any n-gons, which is good. But if we go and select less than 4, oh, you know what? We could have did greater than 4. Sorry, that's the n-gons. My bad. I was doing that wrong. But you can still see where some n-gons are showing up and things like that, right? So that's going to give you a little indicator on like what's not quite right yet, and might need to work in those areas a little bit more. And some of these aren't really that hard to solve or fix or anything like that. Like this particular area might be one of the more challenging ones, but if you do like a half an inset between those two, boom. It's technically quads now. Maybe not the best topo, but it's quads. So you got that going for you, right? And so, yeah, let's do select all by trade again, faces by sides. That's n-gons. So if we do less than 4, you can see that we can select triangles. There are a number of triangles still hanging out in here that I need to go problem solve as well, right? And so it'd be a good idea to solve these before you really move on to the next step. But I kind of rushed through it anyways because I just wanted to see what it would look like with a little bit of paneling and other fun stuff on it. So that's what ends up happening sometimes. You just go straight through the whole thing and get a little bit froggy and just kind of go to this point, right? So you can see what it's pretty much going to end up happening here is that you take that base, you're going to create panels. Like I was saying when I was doing that panel video, you normally I delete the back sides of things. So you don't really have to do that. Like say you do a Shift D, duplicate P, separate selection, right? And you select this mesh now. If you were to inset this, right, and you hold Control, you can push it out like so. And when you do it that way, I'm going to isolate it /. Normally, it doesn't create the backside on it, right? I think this has a solidify on it. It's doing that right now. But, yeah, it doesn't have the backside on it at all. Okay. And so that's going to help you out quite a bit when it comes to creating these little floater panels. It's really not that bad. The edges do get curved. kind of how I explained before. Now, some of you guys are probably wondering why I didn't just say do loop cuts in that video, the panel video. While you can do loop cuts, it's certainly doable. You're going to have problems with concave sections like right here. It doesn't work out too well in this area. This isn't technically like good topo here when you have this kind of setup. So when you do the outset, you select the loop around the side. You do the outset now. What it does is it forces all the E-poles off to the side. It doesn't put them on the edge no more. And so this tends to work out a lot better. It's a little bit slower because now you got to go through and maybe retouch every one of these and bevel it, merge that center, and then dissolve. And this maybe not an ideal situation either, having corners like that, but it certainly is doable and it's useful because you might have to do like a concave section as well. And you can see here, they behave a little bit different. If you do that same process, you actually not only get a pinch point, but you get just kind of bad topo. Sometimes it like eats into itself and stuff like that. So sometimes you got to be careful with that. Usually you just do that and you run it to a polygon back here like so. That's pretty doable right there. Won't have too many issues with that. It might cause a little bit of weird shading, but you can kind of balance these things out as well. This is where surface slide comes in handy. Machine Tools surface slide feature. It's under the modes pie when you're in edit mode. You can start to do things like this, but at the end of the day, you can see what's going on here. We're going to need double padding for this whole section now. It's kind of like holding border again. Just to correct for that one issue, right? And so we can start to work this out though. And let's say like right here, we'll turn surface slide off real quick. We can Alt S, maybe a little, kind of balance this out. You just tweak these corners really is what it's coming down to, right? Got to get them just right, and then you'll get a much better result out of it. Okay, and but so yeah, that's the whole reason I made that video that way. I just kind of failed to mention a few things, I think. That was my bad. But yeah, you can see how this is starting to work out. So you could do it on this one here. I don't know if I necessarily like that, but let's try doing this one. And then we'll do this one like that. So it's kind of like a dead skeleton inset almost. And keep going with that. You can just knife cut it out. So you can add that border all the way around now as needed. Didn't give you too much grief. It is a little bit slow because you have to work all the edges like that, but totally worth it by the end of it because now you're going to have much sharper corners compared to like that soft stuff up there. If you like the soft stuff, keep the soft stuff by all means, but probably better to kind of work these little areas out, you know what I'm saying? Get exactly what you want out of your model. You're going to put this much time and effort into it so as well. And this project overall is at about 4 hours and a half in time. It's not the maybe the fastest process, but it's certainly a lot of fun. And you can see this is going to take place now where we're doing a bunch of this stuff. So what's going to happen from here is you can eventually, if you wanted to, combine these together, right? If you have a good solid base, you could just try to bake all this to it. If you're going into like a game and you don't have a very high poly budget, you could do that. And but also, you can continue working these if you're going to create the high poly, because oftentimes what will probably end up happening is you'll probably just create the panels you need, all the different little pieces, parts, components, whatever. You're going to make it look really good and try to make it as airtight as possible. And then more likely you're going to retopo that. And then you're going to go around, just do another low poly on top of it. And then you can actually bake all of this to that low poly for the most part. You might have to explode some things like eyeballs or whatever. So when you do the baking, these will be separated. And the teeth and stuff like that. So if you have to explode it, you have to. But because of that reason, this doesn't have to necessarily be like the greatest deformable mesh. These don't necessarily have to combine together. And that's where things get interesting because you could take these up in resolution. You can see right now it's pretty low subdivision, or this is a pretty low poly model. You do like a level 1, apply it, and now you can keep working on this mesh with a little bit higher density if you wanted to. But it also gives you a great opportunity to add a multi-resolution modifier. Now, the problem with this particular one for multi-resolution is that I didn't balance the faces as much as I needed to. So it's not going to work out super well. But if you apply a multi-resolution, it's subdivide, right? And I think everybody knows this by now that you can sculpt on multi-res, right? And so you can see here, as we subdivide more and more, if these stay together as little squares and not rectangles, they sculpt a lot better, right? So otherwise you got to keep pushing up the density and you'll get this weird like banding effect sometimes in these areas like this. But if they're nice little squares, you won't have that problem. So you could go through this whole process, and depending on how you want to approach it, you could just keep working with sculpting if you wanted to. Like you can go pretty high on individual segments, perhaps, whatever your machine can handle. But now you have this opportunity to really come through here and just kind of like finely tune all these little corners and edges and stuff like that as well. And so the reason I want to point that out is because I haven't really talked about surface details too much. Let me open up my images here real quick. And under, I think it's under references somewhere, photos maybe, vehicles maybe. Yeah, check out this picture here, and this is a photo of a train I took. And well, everybody's seen a train, right? It's pretty normal. Check this out at the front of this thing. You don't think like hard surface objects get really damaged like this sometimes, but look at the surface details. There's like bug splatter, of course, but there's just like paint chips missing, all kinds of stuff going on there. But there's like also these huge cracks where maybe it hit like an animal in the road or something. There's all kinds of stuff just going on all over the place. So really take your time and look at some vehicles or aircraft or whatever the case is. And like maybe your exotic sports cars, you get these really nice polished finishes and stuff. And of course, this being like the Terminator Rudolph reindeer thing, it probably would have a cleaner finish, generally speaking. Um, but just pay attention to the surface details of objects that you're creating, and just look at the amount of reflection distortion here. It's just a ton of reflection distortion. The screws are kind of like dug in quite a bit, and the panels are kind of bulging a little bit. It's just very it's not smooth is what I'm getting at, and it's something you need to pay attention to when you're making models because multi-res specifically is going to be where you can handle doing a lot of that stuff. Now I know you could use Substance Painter to do a lot of surface distortions or micro details or whatever, and that's fine. You should most likely use Substance to do that kind of stuff. But sometimes just sculpting things in a little bit goes a long way. Like it really does help the overall um, bake when it comes out, right? And so you might want to take your time to just kind of scuff up edges, add little cracks, those like medium sized details. Like you're not going to do grains of dirt, obviously, but if you want to like draw sharp, and I'm going to make this a custom fall off real quick. We can make it like super sharp, yeah, sharper than their sharper setting. But you can see we could just play with these fall offs and create really tiny details if we wanted to. And if we have enough resolution to each little section, we could probably pull this off. Now, the downside of this is you might have a hard time baking it. So when you're baking, you'd actually want to bake in Blender, believe it or not. This is one of the few times you might want to do that because when you're using the baking system under cycles, right? This little option here that says clear image, you can uncheck that. So if your model is broken up into UV islands, like your retopo or whatever the case is, it's broken up into UV islands. You can bake only the pieces you need onto each UV island. If you don't check clear image, you can keep rebaking onto the same normal map or the same whatever you end up baking, right? And so you can keep rebaking all those high poly pieces so you don't have to load every high poly piece and render it. You know what I'm saying? So you can just kind of compound them on top of each other. And that can be extremely useful when you have super dense meshes. And if you're curious how high you can go in Blender when it comes to polygon limits or counts, for me anyways, I'm GPU limited, so I run out of VRAM very quick. But if you have multi-resolutions on your mesh, you might not see them in the viewport, but what you can do is you can actually bump down the preview to just 0. And so you'll just see a regular piece of mesh here. And so you can sculpt all over this model, all over the place. And you can take each individual piece up, super high polygon counts. Like I'm at 3 million right now on this one. But you could easily take this one up to 10 million or whatever your system can handle. And then you should be able to just keep sculpting on the other little sections. All right. So once you switch to another section, you hit Alt Q, you go over there. I'm going to remove that multi-res. If you press Control 2, Control 3 in edit mode or sculpt mode, it'll add a multi-res. Didn't know that. So just keep that in mind. But the idea here anyways is that you can go around and you can add all the little surface details you want. If you have some sculpting alphas to do like hard surface stuff, it could be quite useful. And as long as you don't run out of memory when it comes to render time, you might want to like try doing CPU rendering and using system memory instead of VRAM or whatever. You should be able to bake out those extreme high polys. And so you will only be able to bake, you'll see here in the bake settings, when you're baking from a multi-res, you can only do normals and displacement, okay? That's the only ones you can do. So you have to be careful of that as well. But you can see you can uncheck clear image. And so that's good. And you can bake literally from these sculpted pieces, right? Or you could bake, you just bake targets, right? Active to, or selected to active or whatever. So it'll add up after a little while though, and you'll kind of like bottom out your system at some point probably. You'll have to play with the amount you can get away with. I recommend testing that before you do it because if you spend a lot of time on a sculpt and you can't do it at the end of the day, it's going to be pretty rough, right? So you're going to have a much lower quality than you expected, and it's not going to be quite right. Then you could think about like how you might readjust your UV islands and things like that as well as you work instead of at the end of it. So yeah, you can add all kinds of little surface distortions and details, just little minute things, right? Like if you want to use the scraper here, I have a square alpha on it, but other than that, it's the same thing. So you just kind of scrape around. Oh, we're not even working on that. Try that. Right down. There. You can just add a little bit of surface distortion. Smooth it back out as needed. Might look a little bit lumpy in your 3D view, and you might be like, well, that doesn't make much sense to do that, right? It does at the end of the day. You just get that little bit of distortion going. A lot of times it makes a lot of sense. Just don't want to overdo it. Break up the edges and lines and stuff a little bit. It's going to give you a little bit more of a realistic result. A lot of imperfection in real life, right? And so that's pretty much it, all I wanted to talk about in this video. But you can see how that's going now, right? Perfect? No, but it's a start. And so at about 4 hours into a project, you should start seeing like kind of your results, right? Like it should be pretty much there. Like you can tell something is going right, you know, when you're working on something that's a little bit more complicated. So if you can get to that point and there, you see the like this is working, like the overall shapes, the designs, throw on some preview materials. I just have a very simple material that I made. It's basically an Unreal Engine setup, but it's an image texture from Substance Designer. It's hooked up, right? And it's using object space mapping. So it's object, vector, and then you change the texture to box and blend it a little bit, right? On all of these. And that's pretty much it. There's nothing real fancy there. It's just like a little bit of rust and it's kind of like a metally looking material, right? A little bit of noise to it. So the little bit of grunge, a little bit of noise, nothing too fancy. So of course, it's kind of how you go about doing this. It all starts with the sculpt. That's when you're gonna kind of come up with your ideas, like this pipe. I didn't come up with during the sculpt, believe it or not. I had to actually go back and add it in a little bit later, but I had this nice little cut here. And I thought it would be kind of cool to run a pipe from the like maybe this is like powering the eyes or something. I don't know. So doing something like that was a little bit fun. Trying to get the antlers right was kind of a pain because I don't know. There's not really like a lot of great references, I guess, for reindeer. Apparently, at least I didn't find too many. Specifically, skulls is not too many, but yeah. So basically, you do whatever you got to do to get it to. If you're trying to make a game model, you do whatever you got to do to get to that point where you can make a good low poly and bake to it. Um, or maybe make like a mid poly and don't do any low poly stuff. So you can always try doing that as well. So, anyways, yeah, that's it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed checking out a little behind the scenes thing, I guess, or whatever this was. And check you out in the next one. All right, take care.